Chin on BBC WM.
As you all know, my wife Kay is from Dublin, and we had a photo in the family for a long time. Kay's dad had had it and her aunties had had it, showing Kay's grandfather, Joseph Doyle, in the uniform of the Irish Free State with two other men with a huge Irish tricolor. And the story in the family was that Kay's granddad was at the firing party that shot the volleys over the grave of Michael Collins, the great Irish patriot and leader, but also a man who wanted to bring together the British and the Irish. And he was at a firing party, and then we didn't really realise whether it was true or not. And a while ago, we saw an old cine film of the funeral, and Kay's dad went, "There's me dad." And it was just a wonderful experience to see. And since then, we've been trying to do a bit of research, and I've been really helped in that by some people really would like to say a thank you to. Peter and Martin from the Collins 22 Society, the Birmingham branch. And I want to thank you personally, both of you, for your help in that, because I've done such a lot of research on my own family. With a name like Chin, it's so unusual, and we haven't moved far. Over the last 400 years, we've moved 6 miles from Rowington into King's Heath, and then into Sparkbrook and back out again to King's Heath. So we haven't moved very far.
The last of the big travellers.
So, Martin Dunn, I want to come to you first of all, if I may, just to say a little bit about what is the Collins 22 Society? What do you do in Birmingham?
OK, Carl. Well, my role has been, for the last number of years, is the UK organiser of the Collins 22 Society. And what we do, we hold meetings of like-minded people. And we get people like Nora here and Michael and Bill to come over and give us support here in the UK. And it's mainly based on Irish history, or the parts that people weren't sure of. We won't go back too far, but the turn of the century and the Civil War and all the things that followed. History had it such that it became very politicised, and the version of history I learned was not what it really was like. And I picked that up later on from my father, and who would be a Collins sympathiser and supporter, of which I inherited that.
So what we're talking about is here, after the War of Independence, when the Irish Free State was arranged around 26 counties, and the 6 counties of the north were to stay in the United Kingdom, but there were going to be discussions thereafter. There was then a civil war between those that were against the treaty with the British, led by Eamon de Valera, and those Free Staters who believed in the treaty, led by Michael Collins.
That's exactly right. And I believe if Michael Collins had have lived, he would have negotiated settlement or agreement between the North and the South. We would have had a united Ireland, I'm convinced, had he lived, but that's about what might have been.
Let me come to Bill then, if I may. And would you, Michael, just come and take Martin's space a minute, because I want to, as you as the historian, I want to just tease out a bit more about the history, and then have a chat with Nora Owens, who is the grandniece of Michael Collins. Bill, what is it that led you to get involved with creating this Collins Society in Ireland?
Just what Martin said. The history that we learned growing up through school, primary school and secondary school, did not include Michael Collins or any reference to him, unless that there was somebody in the house who was of that persuasion, the pro-treaty side. Okay. So a group of us at a meeting decided that there was time something was done to honour the memory of Michael Collins. There was no statue. There is Bale na Blá, which is where he was shot. Yeah. It is a Celtic cross on a platform, a concrete platform. There is nothing else there. His grave is adorned, and members of the society maintain the flowers in the grave. James Langton, Paul Fleming, and Ronnie Daly put the flowers on every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. And it's absolutely marvellous, and it's a marvellous site, and it's in a marvellous location. So there's a lot of other stuff. For instance, last night we had a history night here with Martin and with Peter in Birmingham. And Michael Jordan, who is a history lecturer and knows all stuff about Irish history, he gave an absolutely excellent talk on the ramifications of Collins' contribution to the Irish Free State.
So from your personal perspective, from Martin's, and I know from Peter's later on, and presumably from Nora's, there's this great man of history who did so much to gain freedom for Ireland, and yet following the Civil War, following his death and following the domination of the Free State and the Republic by De Valera and his supporters, he was almost airbrushed out of Irish history.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately.
So I want to come
unfairly.
I want to come back to you and Martin and Peter to talk about the personal connections, because obviously there's a personal reason why you want to bring his memory back. But let me just set the scene historically then with you, Michael Doran, if I may, to explain then, perhaps for a more English audience, although we've got a lot of Irish listeners, who was Michael Collins? Why was he so important? And why was he airbrushed out of Irish history?
Well, he's an essential and pivotal figure in Irish history. As we're coming up to November 11th, and we remember the collective effort and sacrifice of so many people in the cause of freedom in the First World War, there was a radical nationalists in Ireland believe that Ireland wouldn't have its freedom unless they had to fight against the British Empire. And Collins emerged, in the famous 1916 Rising, he was only a junior figure, but in the aftermath he arose as the central organising figure, mainly first on the military wing. So his reputation, and most people in England will see him in uniform as a military figure. And at the time, as the War of Independence began in 1919, Collins would have been dubbed a terrorist. And maybe many people in England see him in that light, that he's associated with such terms such as the IRA, for example. Yeah. But unlike, say, the troubles of recent years, they saw themselves as a democratic force and representing the will of the people. And he was instrumental, obviously, in fighting sort of an urban and guerrilla type warfare. But he was so much more than that. He was a founding figure of a state. He helped organise a system of government. He was Minister of Finance in the first Sinn Féin government, but it was based on democratic principles. And unfortunately, the conflict escalated. The then Prime Minister Lloyd George unleashed counter-terror measures, the famous black and tans in Irish history.
More infamous.
Yeah, more infamous. Yeah, and so you had a period for about a year and a half where Lloyd George's government struggled to try and contain this, but ultimately failed to do so. And what's forgotten about is that in Britain there wasn't unity among the political leadership and the people in terms of the Irish question. Many, in particular in the Labour movement, Liberal Party, and some even Conservatives believed a political settlement because Sinn Féin had proven its democratic credentials.
And if we go back, from the 19th century, the issue of home rule for Ireland within the United Kingdom, but having its own parliament, as it once had until 1801, had been a powerful force, and the Liberal Party was behind that. So were many people in the Labour movement.
Absolutely,
and the Irish had been promised home rule.
Absolutely, and had been delayed because of the First World War, and there was this constant delaying and prevarication had created a vacuum for radical nationalists to evolve. But Collins, important to point out, Collins wasn't anti-British.
No,
he'd lived in London for his formative years. Actually, had been in London anyway, like so many Irish people.
Jim Larkin, you look at Jim Larkin, the great Jim Larkin, the leader of the trade unionists and the poor working class people. James Connolly.
I think
Patrick Pearce, got a Brummy father.
Yeah, we shouldn't see him as a parochial figure. He's part of a kind of a new internationalism that's occurring in the early 20th century, in which there's a calls for freedom, democracy, self-determination.
So, explain again, for those that perhaps of us that may not know too much about it, Ireland gets the Irish Free State is formed. And Collins, he's designated to do the negotiation with the British, but it was a poison chalice, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, ultimately, the radical Republicans, so-called, they were never going to be satisfied. Collins had evolved. I mean, he wasn't a dictatorial figure. He believed in the democratic mandate, and Collins negotiated in 10 Downing Street with the likes of Winston Churchill and the then Prime Minister Lloyd George.
Who had great respect for him, didn't he, Churchill?
Absolutely, yes. Churchill became very much won over and became an admirer of Collins because he understood the evolution of Collins as a person. They would have viewed him as a gunman, but they came to see him as effectively a figure of democracy,
who they could talk with.